Obviously, I'm a police officer and you're not under arrest, and this is not the simulation.
That's true.
A bit of about me before we start. First, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respect for the elders past and present, and that this land was and always will be Aboriginal land. Who am I? I'm a police officer for the past 14 years and spent the last 10 years working with the multicultural communities. And as Donna did, she moved from family violence to running out of burning buildings. I moved from multicultural to riot police. So I do public order policing now, completely different kettle of fish. And I'm a CFA volunteer as well. Before we continue, I would like you to بدي اياكم كلكم تروحوا لجهة اليمين بليز. الكل يمشي معي لجهة اليمين. وقفوا وامشوا على جهة اليمين. وقفوا وامشوا على جهة اليمين. وقفوا بليز وامشوا على جهة اليمين. الكل يمشي من الأوضة ويمشي لجهة اليمين. وقفوا وامشوا لجهة اليمين. وقفوا وامشوا لجهة اليمين. كلكم وقفوا وامشوا لجهة اليمين. وحدة تقول للثانية امشوا لجهة اليمين. كلكم وقفوا وامشوا لجهة اليمين. امشوا لجهة اليمين. وقفوا وامشوا لجهة اليمين.
You are. I don't think you're racist.
خليكم عم تمشوا لجهة اليمين. خليكم عم تمشوا لجهة اليمين. All right, how would you go? How do you feel? Was that gibberish? Come back, guys. Thank you for that. The idea of that is I was speaking in Arabic. I don't know who's, how many Arabic speakers or how many people understand Arabic in this room? One? Okay. What was I saying? Go to the right. Why did I do this? How did it make you feel? I'd like to see some feedback from the people here. How did that make you feel, someone speaking another language, wearing a uniform and asking you to change or do something that you don't know what you're doing? I've noticed. I saw the look on your face though. You were smiling and at the same time looking, what the hell, what do I do? What do I do? How do you feel?
Well, I wasn't worried that I was doing something wrong to Galloping.
Yeah, not you personally, no. Yeah. Corrine? Confused. Anyone else? Any other feelings?
I've been in that situation a lot of times because I've been working a lot overseas. So I've been in a situation where I've had a lot of people in uniform speaking our language and pointing, so I just followed pointing.
Very good. But sometimes I might be pointing to the balcony for you to jump, so that's a problem. Careful. What about coming from a person in uniform telling you where to go? Literally.
A bit intimidated.
A bit intimidating. So I put you in the mindset so you can think about the other way around. We were talking about I haven't been for the first day on today, but I've listened to the last session. Whatever you've heard, add another layer for someone who doesn't speak another language. And when the emergency management happens or anything like that happens, you're adding another layer that these people don't understand English very well, don't know how to deal with emergency management from non-English speaking background or new emergency background, or if they come from a war-torn country and it's triggered again, the PTSD. So I thought I'll set the scene before I introduce the speakers. So thank you for being part of this small simulation, but I thought it would make you think outside the square. Introducing our first speaker, Penny Egan-Vine, trained as a medical practitioner with a particular interest in pediatrics. Initially working with children with disability and their families, Penny moved to work full-time as a bereavement counsellor in 1992. From 1990 to 96, she worked with the local Red Cross and critical incident teams and has had a particular interest in community response to disaster for many years. She's been formally working with the refugees since 1997 on the executive of Rural Australians for Refugees. Penny is also part of a group actively sponsoring and settling refugees, Murray Valley Sanctuary Refugee Group. In 2001, she received the membership of Order of Australia of her work in the region around crisis. Penny.
Yes, so thank you, and thank you for inviting me to talk. I wanted to first start by, when I thought about presenting this, I thought everyone knows about refugees, and then I thought maybe they don't. And so who are refugees? The definition is that people who are fleeing persecution, but they are also fleeing disaster and chaos. So for many of them, they have quite in-depth experience of surviving disasters. The disasters may be when the soldiers come into town and start firing, but it's a disaster. And the word refugee is a bit like teenagers. You can have the teenager that's walking around Australia to raise money for starving children. You've got the teenager that's breaking into houses and stealing cars. Teenager doesn't actually encompass, you say the word with a lot of metaphor, and it's the same with the word refugee. They're just human beings who have been forced to use the term refugee in order to receive a political label. You can't get across the border without paperwork unless you're applying to be a refugee. Otherwise you're an illegal. And so refugee is a term applied to someone crossing the border legitimately. Then it stops being relevant to them. It's like saying, this guy's a divorcee. He was divorced from his wife 45 years ago, but he's a divorcee. Or this person's a high school student. They're 72 now, but they were a high school student. It's a term of part of someone's life, but it's not who they are now. And so the preference is to use terms like person of refugee background, new settler, new arrival, new community, or even a migrant. In fact, in the European Union, there's no term for refugee. Everyone's a migrant. There's no distinguishing. And so we're talking today about breaking people down into different boxes of vulnerability. Whether or not that's useful is another matter. Refugees are particularly vulnerable because of their need for a sense of safety. They particularly have lost that sense of safety. They've been forced out of familiar home, familiar environment, and they cannot go back. They cannot go back to rebuild. They've lost community and they have lost a sense of identity. As they reach a point of safety, that vulnerability decreases, but it never really goes away. Once you've had a baby, you've had a baby. You can't undo it. And so that loss of security can have an impact on mental health. They can be carrying PTSD, but it's a very, very small percentage of people. When you're a refugee, you must be traumatised. No, there's a small percentage that are carrying PTSD. The majority are just superb at surviving and getting on with their lives. And they're particularly vulnerable to rejection in a destabilised community, because people will look to blame, scapegoating, and people who are new arrivals who are vulnerable in other ways are likely. We've talked about elder violence, we've talked about domestic violence. Refugees can be identified as they're vulnerable because of their language, as Maha said, their culture. They don't necessarily understand what it's all about. Why are you worried about this? They don't belong, they don't know the procedures, and others may attack them. And the pre-existing sense of chaos may be a positive or a negative. It may mean that they know better than us how to survive. They've been through it before. And I'm just talking now about the emotions that go with chaos, with disaster, is a part of a chaos, and those emotions can be contagious, and part of the role of the emergency response people is to create a contagious calm. Maha was in charge. She wasn't panicking. If you were panicking to say, go over there, it might have been a very different experience for us. The job is to be contagiously calm. But if the person, one of the young men I've worked with, when he was breathalyzed, he was charged with refusing to give a breath test because he couldn't breathe. His eyes were glazed, he was swaying, he was sweating. And the young rookie policeman got quite excited. They got a real one here. And took him down and telling him he had a crime. And the last time this man had been that close to policemen, they were trying to kill him. He'd been in hospital for 3 weeks after his last close encounter with a policeman. He had no idea that's why he couldn't breathe. He couldn't explain not being able to breathe. So the response, calm, directed, directive, may evoke a paradoxical response, which can be confusing. And I think part of what we're talking about, and when I'm speaking for my friend Isabel later on in the day, is about how do you re-establish a sense of security after a disaster, and how do you get people back into housing? How do you re-establish a safe world? Thank you.